continuing in our scripture reading in the harmony of the Gospels. We're reading all four gospel accounts in one running narrative, thanks to the work of George Knight. If you enjoy this reading, please consider purchasing the original source material. You can find that on Amazon and on Logos. And that's the software that I'm using for the scripture reading here that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. That's the Logos Bible software that I'm using. That's where I purchased the book. And so we're going to be continuing our reading today, picking up where we left off from yesterday, in which we saw the last thing we saw was Peter's denial after Jesus had been arrested. Peter denies knowing Jesus, and then Jesus is officially condemned by the Sanhedrin, which is the formal council of the Jewish leaders. And so now he's about to be passed on to the Roman authorities. But before that, we see what is going on in Judas's life, and that's where we're picking up today. And if you enjoy this readings, like I said, consider getting a copy of George Knight's book. But also, I challenge you to follow along with the scripture references that you'll see on the screen as I read through. And make note of those in your own Bibles so that you can kind of annotate that and be able to take notes in your own Bibles with the scriptures we're reading. And so that being said, let's dive back into the text. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was full of remorse, and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and to the elders. "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood," he said. "What's that to us?" they said. "See to it yourself." So he threw the silver into the sanctuary and departed. Then he went and hanged himself. The chief priests took the silver and said, "It's not lawful to put it into the temple treasury, since it is blood money." So they conferred together and bought the potter's field with it as a burial place for foreigners. Therefore that field has been called Blood Field to this day. Then what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him whose price was set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. Now we have Jesus going before Pilate. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They did not enter the headquarters themselves. Otherwise they would be defiled and unable to eat the Passover. Then Pilate came out to them and said, "What charge do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you." So Pilate told them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." "It's not legal for us to put anyone to death," the Jews declared. They said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, signifying what sort of death he was going to die. Then Pilate went back into the headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "Are you asking this on your own, or have others told you about me?" "I'm not a Jew, am I?" Pilate replied. "Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" "My kingdom is not of this world," said Jesus. "If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. As it is, my kingdom does not have its origin here." "You are a king then?" Pilate asked. "You say that I'm a king," Jesus replied. "I was born for this. I have come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." "What is truth?" said Pilate. After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no grounds for charging him." And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man subverting our nation, opposing payment of taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king." And the chief priests began to accuse him of many things. And then Pilate said to him, "Don't you hear how much they are testifying against you?" But he didn't answer him on even one charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. But they kept insisting, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee, where he started, even to here." Now when Pilate heard this, he asked if the man was a Galilean. Finding that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem during those days. And Herod was very glad to see Jesus. For a long time, he'd wanted to see him because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some miracle performed by him. So he kept asking him questions, but Jesus did not answer him. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And then Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt, mocked him, dressed him in a brilliant robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Previously, they had been hostile toward each other. Now, while he, Pilate, was sitting on the judge's bench, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for today I've suffered terribly in a dream because of him." Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You have brought me this man as one who subverts the people. But in fact, after examining him in your presence, I have found no grounds to charge this man with those things you accuse him of. Neither has Herod, because he sent him back to us. Clearly, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will have him whipped and release him." Now, at the festival, it was the governor's custom to release to the crowd one prisoner whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. The chief priests and the elders, however, persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to execute Jesus. And the governor asked them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" Then they cried out together, "Take this man away! Release Barabbas to us!" He had been thrown into prison for a rebellion that had taken place in the city and for murder. And Pilate asked them, "What should I do then with Jesus, who is called Messiah?" They all answered, "Crucify him!" Then he said, "Why? What has he done wrong?" But they kept shouting, "Crucify him!" all the more. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers also twisted a crown out of thorns and put it on his head, and threw a purple robe around him. They repeatedly came up to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and were slapping his face. Pilate went outside again and said to them, "Look, I'm bringing him outside to you to let you know I find no grounds for charging him." Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the temple police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate responded, "Take him and crucify him yourselves, for I find no grounds for charging him." "We have a law," the Jews replied to him, "and according to that law he must die, because he made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was more afraid than ever. He went back into the headquarters and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus did not give him an answer. So Pilate said to him, "You're not talking to me. Don't you know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" "You would have no authority over me at all," Jesus answered him, "if it hadn't been given you from above. This is why the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." From that moment, Pilate made every effort to release him. But the Jews shouted, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside. He sat down on the judge's bench in a place called the Stone Pavement, in Hebrew Gabbatha. It was the preparation day for the Passover, and it was about 6 a.m. Then he told the Jews, "Here is your king." But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Should I crucify your king?" "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that a riot was starting instead, he took some water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." So then, because of them, he handed him over to be crucified. Therefore, they took Jesus away. That concludes today's readings. Tomorrow we will pick up with Jesus being mocked by the soldiers. God bless.